Dawn breaks over the savannah. The air is still cool, but already the landscape is beginning to change. Light spreads across the grasslands in long bands, catching dust suspended above the ground. Movement emerges slowly. A rhinoceros walks with its head lowered, sweeping steadily through the grass. Each step is deliberate. Each movement removes another mouthful from the plain. Elsewhere, beyond the open ground, the vegetation thickens into shrubs and scattered woodland. Another rhinoceros moves there, partially hidden among the tree branches and shadows. Its head lifts, the upper lip extends forward, curling around leaves before pulling them free. At a distance, these animals appear similar. Both are massive herbivores. Both carry thickened skin, heavy skulls, and horns formed not of bone, but compacted keratin. But beneath these similarities lies a profound ecological divide. One is a grazer, adapted for feeding on short grasses and open terrain. The other is a browser, selecting leaves and shoots from dense vegetation. Together, they represent two distinct evolutionary strategies, shaped by different environments and different constraints. And yet, despite their size and apparent strength, both have become increasingly vulnerable in the modern world. Today, we are going to explore the biology, ecology, evolution, and conservation of the African rhinoceroses. Rhinoceroses are often treated as a single idea: large, armoured, uniform. But this impression hides a more complex history. There are 5 species of rhinoceros alive today, spread across Africa and Asia. Each occupies a different environment. Each follows a different ecological path. The white rhinoceros occupies open grasslands, where visibility is high and vegetation is kept short. It feeds almost exclusively on grasses, moving steadily as it grazes. The black rhinoceros, by contrast, is more often found in shrubland and woodland. It selects leaves, shoots, and branches, moving through denser vegetation where cover is available. In Asia, this variation continues. The Sumatran rhinoceros moves through tropical rainforest, where dense vegetation and scattered food shape its behavior. The Indian rhinoceros is closely associated with river systems and floodplains, where tall grasses and seasonal water shape the landscape. And the Javan rhinoceros persists in dense lowland forest, rarely seen and restricted to a tiny remaining range. Across this group, there is no single habitat, no single feeding strategy. Some graze, others browse. Some move through open plains, others remain within dense cover. This diversity reflects a shared ancestry that has been shaped over time by different environments and different limits. Today, we are only going to focus on one branch of this family tree, the 2 species of African rhinoceroses. If you would like to see a video on the Asian species in the future, then make sure you leave a comment letting me know. Among all of this diversity, the white rhinoceros and black rhinoceros show an interesting contrast. They evolved on the same continent, from a relatively recent common ancestor, and yet, despite this shared origin, they represent 2 distinct ecological strategies. One is a specialist grazer, the other a selective browser. To understand how this divergence emerged, we need to follow it, from diet to structure to behaviour. Before we look more closely at how these animals feed, it is worth considering how they are named. White and black suggest a clear visual contrast, one that seems to align neatly with differences in their behaviour and ecology. But these names are misleading. The white rhinoceros and the black rhinoceros are not meaningfully different in colour. Both are grey, their skin tone shifting with light, mud and dust. The origin of these names remains uncertain. Several explanations have been proposed, but none are fully supported. There are, however, alternative names that describe a more consistent difference. The white rhinoceros is sometimes referred to as the square-lipped rhinoceros. The black rhinoceros is the hooked-lipped rhinoceros. These names reflect a distinction that is immediately visible and biologically significant. The white rhinoceros has a wide, flattened upper lip, forming a straight edge across the front of the mouth. It is well suited to cropping grass close to the ground. By contrast, the black rhinoceros has a prehensile upper lip. It can extend, curl, and grasp, allowing the animal to select individual leaves and shoots, almost like a reduced version of the trunk seen in tapirs. This difference is subtle in isolation, but it is the starting point for a much broader divergence in how these two animals interact with their environment. The difference in the lip is immediately visible, but it does not exist in isolation. In the white rhinoceros, the wide, squared lip is part of a feeding system built for grazing. The head is carried low, often held close to the ground for extended periods. This posture is supported by a pronounced muscular hump over the shoulders and a strong ligament system along the neck, allowing the head to remain lowered without constant muscular effort. As the animal moves, the motion is continuous. The lip presses against the ground, cropping grass in broad sweeps. There is little selection. The aim is efficiency, removing large quantities of short vegetation with each step. This diet places specific demands on the teeth. Grasses contain silica and are often coated with dust and grit, making them highly abrasive. Over time, this has favoured high-crowned teeth, capable of withstanding sustained wear. In the black rhinoceros, the same structures are arranged differently. The head is held higher, with greater flexibility in its movement. The prehensile upper lip can extend and curl, grasping leaves and pulling them into the mouth. Feeding is slower, more selective. Individual plants are targeted, rather than swept up in bulk. This browsing diet reduces the need for continuous ground-level feeding, and the associated structural support seen in the white rhinoceros is less pronounced. The neck and shoulders are still powerful, but not specialized to the same degree. The teeth, too, reflect this difference. Leaves and shoots are less abrasive than grasses, and the pattern of wear is correspondingly reduced. Taken together, these differences form two distinct feeding strategies. One is built around continuous grazing, shaping and maintaining open grasslands. The other is adapted for selective browsing, moving through and interacting with denser vegetation. These are not minor variations. They represent two different ways of using the same landscape, two solutions to the same set of environmental pressures. These differences in feeding do not occur in isolation. They shape how each species moves through the landscape and where they can persist. The ranges of the white rhinoceros and the black rhinoceros overlap across parts of eastern and southern Africa. On a map, this overlap appears substantial. Both species can be found in the same broad regions, sometimes even within the same protected areas. And yet, they are rarely in direct competition. The white rhinoceros is associated with open grasslands, where visibility is high and grazing can be sustained. Its movements tend to follow the distribution of short grasses and access to water. The black rhinoceros occupies a different layer of the same environment. It moves through shrubland and woodland, where cover is denser and food is more varied, but less evenly distributed. Where these habitats meet, at the boundaries between open grassland and thicker vegetation, the two species may occur in close proximity. But even here, their interactions are limited. They are separated not by distance, but by diet. This separation is an example of niche partitioning. Two large herbivores, similar in size and ancestry, reducing competition by specializing in different food sources. Over time, these differences do more than reduce conflict. They shape the structure of the ecosystem itself. White rhinoceroses maintain short grass systems through continuous grazing, influencing plant composition and the animals that depend on it. Black rhinoceroses, by feeding on woody plants, affect the growth and distribution of shrubs and small trees. Together, they divide the landscape, not into territories, but into roles. Despite their size, rhinoceroses operate in a sensory world that is surprisingly limited. Both the white rhinoceros and the black rhinoceros have relatively poor vision. At distance, shapes blur. Movement is more easily detected than detail. Instead, they rely heavily on smell and hearing, chemical cues carried on the wind, or sounds moving through open or dense vegetation, provide much of the information they use to interpret their surroundings. This has consequences. Encounters can escalate quickly at close range, when visual information is limited and other clues are ambiguous. Social structure reflects the same balance between awareness and uncertainty. White rhinoceroses are more tolerant of one another. In suitable habitat, they may form loose aggregations, particularly around grazing areas and water sources. These groups are not highly structured, but they allow for some degree of social spacing within open environments. Black rhinoceroses are more solitary, in denser vegetation, where visibility is reduced and resources are more scattered. Individuals tend to operate independently, coming together only briefly for mating. Across both species, social behaviour is flexible but limited. It is shaped more by environment and perception than by complex group coordination. Beneath these differences in behaviour and ecology lies a shared biological limit. Rhinoceroses reproduce slowly. Gestation lasts well over a year and typically results in a single calf. Females may only reproduce every few years, depending on conditions and the survival of their offspring. This means populations recover slowly from decline. Even under ideal circumstances, growth is gradual. Under pressure, it becomes fragile. For large, long-lived animals like these, stability is not just beneficial, it is essential. These traits, slow reproduction, limited sensory range, and strong habitat specialization, are not disadvantages in stable environments, but they become critical under disturbance. When mortality increases, replacement is slow. When populations fragment, recovery is delayed. And once this process begins, it is difficult to reverse. It is within this biological framework that modern conservation history must be understood. Because over the past few centuries, those systems changed rapidly. Across Africa, rhinoceroses came into sustained contact with expanding human populations. Habitat was converted for agriculture and settlement. Movement between regions became increasingly restricted. And, critically, they were subject to direct hunting pressure. Rhinos were killed for meat, for sport, and later at scale for their horns, driven by trade networks that extended far beyond their native range. Rhino horns have long been used in traditional medicines in parts of Asia, particularly in China and Vietnam. Powdered horn has historically been incorporated into remedies intended to treat a wide variety of ailments. Chemically, however, rhino horn is composed primarily of keratin, the same structural protein found in human hair and fingernails. And modern scientific studies have found no evidence that it possesses unique medicinal properties. Despite this, demand for rhino horn remains high in some regions today. And this is the central problem. For a slow-breeding, slow-growing, large mammal, continued hunting pressure is simply unsustainable. Both African rhinoceroses were affected, but the outcomes were not identical. The black rhinoceros experienced a broad and sustained decline across much of its range. Populations were reduced, often rapidly, and then fragmented into isolated pockets separated by areas where the species had already disappeared. For much of the 20th century, the black rhino was considered the most numerous of all living rhinoceros species. Estimates suggest the population went from several 100,000 at the beginning of the 20th century to around 70,000 by the 1960s. By 1981, only 10 to 15,000 remained. The decline continued. By 2004, the population had fallen to only 2,410 individuals, a reduction of well over 98% in little more than a century. This pattern of loss was not only a reduction in numbers, it was a breakdown in connectivity. A species that was once distributed across much of sub-Saharan Africa was reduced to scattered remnants, isolated from one another by landscapes it no longer occupied. And isolated populations are inherently vulnerable. Small populations are more susceptible to local extinction, less resilient to environmental change, and slower to recover when losses occur. For an animal with such low reproductive turnover, these effects accumulate rapidly. The white rhinoceros followed a different, and in some ways even more extreme trajectory. While black rhinos persisted in fragmented populations across much of their range, the white rhinoceros was reduced to an extraordinarily small remnant population. By the end of the 19th century, perhaps only a few dozen white rhinos remained. Today, 2 subspecies of white rhinoceros are recognised, but their outcomes have diverged dramatically. The northern white rhinoceros was heavily impacted by hunting and regional instability throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Over time, it disappeared from nearly all of its range. Today, it no longer exists as a functional wild population. The last known male died in 2018. Only 2 individuals remain alive today, and both are female. In biological terms, the northern white rhinoceros is now functionally extinct. The southern white rhinoceros followed a different path. Reduced to a tiny surviving population in southern Africa, it became the focus of intensive protection, legal enforcement, protected areas, and later translocation and managed breeding programs allowed numbers to increase significantly over time. This represents one of the most substantial recoveries of a large mammal species in modern history. But it is important to recognise what this recovery represents. It is not a return to historical abundance. It is a managed persistence of a lineage that narrowly avoided disappearing entirely. So why have different rhinoceros species and subspecies experienced such different outcomes? The black rhinoceros remains absent from much of its former range, but protected reserves, captive breeding efforts, and reintroduction programs have gradually increased population numbers in some regions. Today, more than 6,000 individuals are estimated to survive in the wild. The southern white rhinoceros has experienced an even more dramatic recovery, with well over 14,000 individuals alive today. Given how small the surviving population once was, this recovery is remarkable. By many biological expectations, recovery from such a small founding population should have been extremely slow and uncertain. But it demonstrates what sustained protection and coordinated conservation efforts can achieve. And then there is the northern white rhinoceros. It is not the only rhinoceros subspecies believed to have disappeared in recent history. The western black rhinoceros was officially declared extinct in 2011. But the decline of the northern white rhinoceros has unfolded differently and far more visibly. Unlike populations that faded gradually through diminishing sightings and failed surveys, the final northern white rhinos remain known individuals, living under constant human supervision. Their extinction is not hypothetical or historical. It is ongoing. And this contrast reveals something important about rhinoceros conservation as a whole. These outcomes are not determined by hunting pressure alone. They emerge from the interaction between external pressures and biological constraint. Slow reproductive rates mean losses are replaced gradually. Limited dispersal makes recolonization difficult once populations are fragmented. And specialized habitat requirements restrict where recovery can occur. The same traits that define how rhinoceroses live also define how they respond to decline. Despite the severe declines experienced during the 20th century, there is still a reason for cautious optimism. Both African rhinoceros species persist under continued protection and active management. The southern white rhinoceros survives in larger numbers, though it remains dependent on protected areas and sustained intervention. Poaching continues to pose a major threat, but continued conservation efforts have allowed populations to persist and, in some regions, increase. The black rhinoceros also continues to recover in parts of its range, though populations remain fragmented and vulnerable. Even so, the long-term decline of the species has been slowed, and in some regions partially reversed. There are also other, more experimental strategies being trialled with both species. In some regions, conservationists have attempted to reduce poaching pressure through dehorning. By removing most of the horn under controlled conditions, managers reduce the incentive for poachers to target individual animals. In certain populations, this approach has reduced poaching rates significantly, but it is not without trade-offs. Horns play roles in social interactions, defense, and maternal protection of calves, while the long-term ecological consequences of repeated dehorning remain uncertain. Other strategies remain highly controversial. In some cases, limited trophy hunts of older, non-reproductive individuals have been authorized, with the resulting funds directed toward conservation programs. Proposals for legal horn harvesting and regulated trade have also been advanced as alternatives to illegal trafficking. Supporters argue that these approaches may generate funding and reduce pressure from black markets. Critics argue they risk increasing demand, complicating enforcement, and further commodifying already vulnerable species. As pressures intensify and populations shrink, rhinoceros conservation has become increasingly interventionist. In some cases, protection now extends beyond habitat and anti-poaching enforcement into direct biological and technological control. There is even a small measure of hope for the northern white rhinoceros. In 2019, scientists announced that they had successfully fertilized northern white rhino eggs using stored sperm collected before the death of the last male. The resulting embryos remain in storage, with the long-term goal of implanting them into southern white rhinoceros surrogates. Whether this would be sufficient to restore a viable population remains uncertain. But for a subspecies long considered inevitably doomed, to represent something that had nearly disappeared entirely, possibility. For millions of years, rhinoceroses have persisted through changing climates, shifting ecosystems, and the rise and disappearance of entire animal communities. Today, their greatest challenges are no longer environmental alone, but human. And yet, despite everything, they remain grazers and browsers. Specialists shaped by different landscapes, following evolutionary paths that still survive into the present. Their future is uncertain, but their story is not yet over. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the African rhinoceroses. If you're interested in the research behind this episode, you can find a document with image credits and sources in the description below. These videos take a great deal of time and research to produce. They will always remain free to watch. But if you would like to support the channel and gain access to new videos a little earlier, you can find a link to my Patreon below as well. And to everyone who already supports the channel, thank you. Your support genuinely helps make these videos possible. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, and keep learning. There's still so much to discover about the world's rare and remarkable species. And the more we understand, the better our chances of protecting them. Thanks for watching.